Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and since it's still Nonfiction November, I thought that today I'd share with you my collection of nonfiction books. And I recently did a similar collection about all of my antique books, which I will leave linked down below and up there. And the reason why I'm doing these collections kind of extra is because I usually don't talk about these books. I don't show those books in my general bookshelf tours, because then the bookshelf tours would get way too long. And my other third collection that I never show in my bookshelf tours is my graphic novels slash mangas. We'll see if I'll ever do a collection of that, because I have most of my mangas in German, so doing a collection of that would include me looking for what the titles of these mangas are in English for over 400 mangas, and that would be multiple hours of research that I'm so far not willing to put time into. But anyway, this is about my nonfiction collection, of which I have, I think, between 30 and 40 books, and a lot of them I got for uni. I study both economics as well as social and cultural anthropology, and then I also have acquired a lot of nonfiction over the years, ever since I was about 10, 12 years old, that just looked interesting to me. And gotta be honest, this video is gonna be embarrassing for me, because most of these books, even though they have been on my shelves for 10 plus years, I have not read. So that's gonna be embarrassing. It's basically gonna be a collection where I'm just like, hey, look at this book I have, isn't that neat? I haven't read it. But yeah, let's get into it. So first let me show you how my books look on my shelves. I'm sorry if the lighting is a bit weird, but it's already quite dark outside, so this is the best that I can do. As you can see, I have one shelf of nonfiction right over here on the very top of my main bookshelf, I guess, and it's between my graphic novels as well as then my dictionaries and my travel guides, which technically I guess are also nonfiction, but I won't show them to you. And on this shelf I have the books that I did not directly get because of uni. I mean, I guess you could say that these economic books over here I got because of uni, but they weren't required reading. That's what I mean. So aside from my economics books, I have some history books, mythology, and then also nonfiction related to stories and to books in general. And now let me show you the second nonfiction shelf that I have. If you look at the layout of my room, this shelf is pretty much exactly opposite my bookshelves, and it's right next to my desk, which I won't properly show you right now because it's a mess, because exam time. But anyway, since I'm studying a lot here I mostly have the books that I had to get because of uni, and then also some anthropology books that I didn't get because of uni, as well as some books that are just generally related to Earth and different countries, mostly Japan and so on. And then I will show you my anthropology books because I do think they are generally quite interesting. Here are my economics books, which I won't show you because they are mostly just scripts that we got for uni, and they're really not that interesting. But yeah, also in the back is the rest of my economics scripts and maths scripts and so on. So yeah, that's the second shelf that I have, or I guess two shelves if you want to be very, very particular. As you just saw, most of my nonfiction collection is on the very topmost shelf, so I won't show them to you in the usual bookshelf tour style, but I'll stay seated right here and show them to you like this, because I don't want awkward angles. So let's get started. So the first three books I have are books about vampires, and I have quite a funny story about those, which, by the way, we're going to be here quite some time because I'll probably talk about every single book on this list. But anyway, I have a funny story about my vampire books. I, of course, got them right after I read Twilight with 13, 14 years old, and in school we were supposed to write our first academic paper. It wasn't really supposed to be academic, it was 5 pages, but our first time doing research and whatever. And I bought books for that. I wrote on vampires in literature because I was obsessed with Twilight. Of course that was going to be my topic. And I researched a lot, way more than we were probably supposed to. I was probably the only person who did not look at Wikipedia at all for my paper, but I still got a B because it sounded too copied and it sounded like it was plagiarized, and like it was so upsetting to me because I put so much work into that paper. But anyway, the first of those books is a book that only is published in German, and that is Der Vampir sind wir, der unsterbliche Mythos von Dracula bis Twilight by Rainer M. Köppel. The title translates to The Vampire is Us. And it's basically kind of a look at human psychology and why vampires are so interesting to us. And I did actually read this, but I remember nothing because, again, I read it when I was 12, 13, maybe 14, I don't know. The second is actually a published academic work from uni, and it's by Milo Sikore, Der Vampir in Literatur und Geschichte, The Vampire in Literature and History. And it's exactly what it tells you in the title. It just talks about the different iterations of vampires in literature, and then also kind of the mythos vampire in different cultures. And I read this as well. And then the third book I have was actually translated into English, although it's originally in French, and that is The Secret History of Vampires by Claude Lecoultre. And as you can see, as I have tabbed it, I have also read this. And as far as I remember, this is mostly about the mythos vampire and like where the myth of the vampire comes from and its multiple iterations. And I also really enjoyed this one. So yeah, that's my vampire nonfiction that I have. Next, let's move on to the books that I have about books. First, I have A History of the Book in 100 Books by Roderick Cave and Sarah Ayad. And this is basically recounting history, how we got from cave paintings to now our modern book, and like from all over the world. And I have not read this. I would say it's interesting, but I have not read it. Then next I have A History of Reading by Alberto Manguel, and as you can see, since I have tabbed it, I have read part of this. I never finished it though, which I still need to do because I did really enjoy the parts of it that I have read. It's, again, pretty obvious, a history of reading, and it kind of doesn't just look at the reading of words, but just like reading in general, reading of the stars and so on. Next, I have two books by Umberto Eco, and I have not read both of them. Yes, I told you, this was going to be a video of shame for me. But anyway, the first of those is the Book of Legendary Lands, in which Umberto Eco basically just talks about like legendary lands, either from myth like Atlantis or El Dorado, and then also just like from stories or like books like Middle Earth and so on. I'm sure it's very interesting. There's also a lot of like pictures inside, but I have not read it yet. And then the second book I have by Umberto Eco is Die Kunst des Bücherliebens, which apparently hasn't been translated into English because I couldn't find an English title, but the English translation would basically be The Art of Loving Books. And as I said, I have not read these either. By the way, if my positioning within the frame changes every now and again, it's because I have to get up and get the books, obviously. So next I have a few books that aren't about books in general, but about specific stories. The first of those is Gewalt, Götter und Intrigen, die Welt von Game of Thrones. Violence, Gods and Intrigues, The World of Game of Thrones by Stefan Servos, and like as the title suggests, this is about a Game of Thrones, both the TV show as well as the books. It talks on the one hand about the inspirations, like the historical inspirations behind the books, but there were also some chapters in here, I did read this by the way, there were some chapters in here that I found very interesting when it comes to like translating fantasy like into any other language, especially as it concerns thought up names of places, of like people and so on, and how can you properly translate those without losing the meaning while still kind of also not losing the feeling of the name. It's like hard to explain, but I really enjoyed this book. And then the second book that I have that's concerning a specific book is Auf den Spuren von Faust, which I don't know how to translate. It's like Looking for Faust, kind of. and it's by Thorsten Unger, and this is kind of concerning the both historical as well as literary roots of the figure of Faust, who of course is one of my favorite literary figures ever, and I did my final German paper on him. So yeah, I have not read this yet. I really need to. Now we're getting into my history as well as mythology non-fiction. The first I have is Wie Dracula den Kopf verlor und Sissi die Lust. 21 unerhörte Geschichten aus der Geschichte by Ronald Feisel. This is also an originally German book, so there's no translation into English, but the translation of the title would be How Dracula Lost His Head and Sissi Her Passion. Sissi, of course, is a very famous royal from Austrian history. And yeah, it's basically just 21 funny stories from history. And I have read a few of them, but I have not finished this book yet. And I need to. Just a second, later Sarah, who started getting ready for bed but luckily didn't take off her makeup yet and started editing the video already, I forgot about one book, and that is A Short History of Drunkenness by Mark Forsyth, which again, I have also started reading, but I have not finished yet. Although, it was fun. The, 20 pages that I have read so far. Not even 20 pages, 10 pages that I have read so far. I read the foreword. Yeah, that's how my non-fiction reading goes. So now on to earlier Sarah again. Next I have Mythologie und Kulte Griechenlands by, I cannot see the author. I'm sorry, I cannot see the author on the title, but the title translates to Mythology and Cults of Ancient Greece, and I have read this, I think, but I got this right at the height of my ancient Greece obsession, which was at 10-11 years old, so I cannot remember anything from this book. I am sorry. And yes, when I was at that age, I very soon started reading adult ancient Greece non-fiction, because I was annoyed that in every single children's non-fiction they always just wrote the same things, and I was like, I want to know more though, tell me more. So yeah, that's how I got this when I was 10 years old. A bit more geared towards children was Teslav's Encyclopedia of Mythology, and Teslav is this publisher, this non-fiction publisher in Germany, I think. But this isn't just ancient Greek mythology, this is just general world mythology. As you can see, there's some Hindu mythology stuff, some Aztec mythology, and then Roman Greek mythology obviously as well. Then I have Rätsel der Menschheit, Mysteries of Humanity, which I have not read. And this is basically just stuff in human history that we don't really know everything about yet, that we can know about it. Obviously there's Stonehenge on the cover, so these types of mysteries. Again, as I already said, I have not read it yet. I have not read a lot of these books. Then I have Divine Proportion, Fee in Art, Nature and Science by Priya Hemingway. And obviously this is about the divine proportion. And because of that, obviously, I don't know if you can see it with the lights, you have the Vitruvian man on the dust jacket, if I can get it off. And then you have the Nautilus spiral on the hardcover, because obviously these two are the most cited examples of the divine proportion. So let's continue on with some history. First I have this archaeology book, because I used to want to become an archaeologist. I never did, and it's just an encyclopedia about diggings, but also methods and so on, and findings, and everything to do with archaeology. So next I have probably my favorite non-fiction from when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, and it's this illustrated world history. And to anyone who has children that age, I can only recommend trying to find something like this, because it's just amazing. First of all, it's really comprehensive world history, but then also it's done in a way where you don't have the world histories of the single countries and the single continents, but where in a way, let me try if I can find a page in that I can do. So I found a good page, but like the way this book is done, I don't know if you can see it, but it's not done by country or continent or anything, but it's done by time. So on the same pages, kind of over here, you have the Japanese feudal system, while over here you have the 100 Years' War between England and France, because these two things kind of existed at the same time. So you have the parallels of what happened all over the world at the same time in history, and I just loved this book so much. I actually noticed while like opening this that it's close to falling apart because I read it that much as a child. Next we have some more history books, just not for children. The first one is this right here, The Feudal System by Steffen Patzold. This CH Beck or CH Beck is like this publisher who does these kind of non-fiction books in these small formats that are quite short and just like really easy to read and really comprehensive. And so I do have quite a few of these, although I haven't read most of them. I have read this one though. And then I also have one on the 100 Years' War by Joachim Ehlers. And the reason why I have both of these is because my final paper in school, in high school, for history, which I wrote my final paper in, or one of my final papers in, was on the 100 Years' War. And for anyone who knows about the 100 Years' War, they also know that like the feudal system in Europe was, or in France, was quite an important part about why the war came to be. So I have read both of these books. Then I have History of Science in Ancient Europe by Michael Sommer. I have not read this one. And I also have not read History of Capitalism, which obviously I bought because I study economics, and that's something that's quite interesting to me. And with that, we're firmly in my economics books. First, I have The Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty, who of course won the Nobel Prize for Economics a few years back, I think. And I have not read this yet. I have started it on Audible multiple times, but I got this from my mom one Christmas after I started studying economics. And I really need to read it, but it's just like so intimidating. It's so big. It's 800 pages long. Like, that's scary in a non-fiction. Another non-fiction for economics that I got from my dad after I started studying economics is That's the First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. And I also have started this, but have not finished this. And it's also quite a thick boy. It's over 600 pages as well, and again, that's just scary in a non-fiction. I have two last economics books. The first is Freakonomics, a rogue economist explores the hidden side of everything by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. I got this from my birthday from a friend 1 year, and I have not read this yet. And the last economics book that I have, aside from, as I said, my scripts that I won't show to you because they're quite boring, is Economic Policy, Theory and Practice by a couple of different authors, which, like, I'm lazy, I'm sorry, I won't go through all of the authors now. But yeah, I actually think I did get this for uni, for a course specifically, but I never had to read it for that course, so I don't know where I got it, but I also have not read this yet. But again, thick boy. Scary. Next, I have two times basically the same book, and that is Tippi aus Afrika, Das Mädchen, das mit den Tieren spricht, which is Tippi from Africa, the girl who talks with animals. And these books I loved when I was a little child, like 5, 6, 7. It's basically about this little girl whose two parents are photographers. And because of that, she grew up in the African desert, I think in Namibia. And she basically spent all her time in the wilderness with the animals there. And when I was 5, 6 years old, that would absolutely have been my dream. And it's like full, obviously, of photographs of her because, again, her parents were photographers. And I absolutely loved her story, and just, it's basically her story of her childhood. Absolutely loved these books. And I don't know why I got the same book 2 times, but I have it, so that shows you how much I loved it. Now we're on my other nonfiction shelf and still continuing on with books that I did not get for uni, and continuing on with 3 more photography books. The first 2 are these, which are Cornwall from Above by John Such, as well as Pen with Moods by David Chapman. I got these 2 when I was 16, I think, because we were in Penzance with our school. And one of the weeks we were there, we spent working at one of the places there. And I worked at this kind of auction house for old paintings. And when I left, they kind of gifted me these 2 photography books. And I of course looked through them. I read them, I guess, because there's no words in them anyway. Another photography book that I have is this Planet Earth, which of course Planet Earth is like this documentary series that's done by BBC, and this is the corresponding picture photography book. And I did actually read this one through. I got it when I was like 12, I think, and I absolutely loved Planet Earth. So yeah, absolutely loved this book as well. Then I have this book on expeditions, and surprise surprise, it's not just on colonial expeditions, but like from everyone, from the Greeks, from the ancient Egyptians, everything, the Chinese, all the different peoples of the world who did expeditions at different times in the history of humanity. Although obviously there's also a big part of colonial expeditions in this book right here. Next, I have a bunch of nonfiction about Japan because, of course, I am still kind of obsessed with Japan. I love the country. I've been there 2 times. And before I went for the first time, I bought a bunch of books, of which I haven't read most. Gotta be honest, once again. But the first of those is Japan Between Tradition and Modernity. Modern times. You know what I mean. And it's by National Geographic, and this once again is like a photography book, which I did look through, but I didn't read it. I just looked at the pretty pictures because they're pretty pictures, and it's massive. I had such a hard time for the first time when I got this, before I got the shelf that it's now on, like finding a space for this on my shelf because it wouldn't fit anywhere. Then I have another one of these little guys on the history of Japan by Manfred Pohr. I have not read this. Again, judge me if you will. Then I have this little guy right here by Claude Lévi-Strauss, The Other Side of the Moon. And I also have not read this as well. It's like part of like whatever Claude Lévi-Strauss wrote about Japan, like part of his works. And again, I don't know why I haven't read it yet, because this, especially this one, should have been read by me because I love Japan, and I should technically have already read some Claude Lévi-Strauss because he's a very famous anthropologist, so yeah. Kinda embarrassing, I have not gotten to this yet. Then I have this book right here, which is just called Samurai by Isabella Blanc, and this is just on a history of the samurai, obviously. Also, have not read it yet. Then I have these 2 books by Nicolas Bouvier, who I think grew up in Japan, at least part of his childhood, and then traveled there again every now and again. I do not actually know who exactly he is, but I got this before I went to Japan for the first time. I did actually take both of them with me to Japan. I started one of them, I never finished it, and I still gotta do that. Although I'm less inclined nowadays to like read just diaries about traveling somewhere, but written by white people. You know what I mean? So now we're solidly moving into the social and cultural anthropology as well as cultural studies topics or books. But these books just now I still got like on my own accord and not specifically for uni. First I have Eine Tochter ist kein Sohn by Wiebke von Taden, which translates to A Daughter is No Son. And this is just a simple history of being born a girl in like history and what that meant for a lot of girls to be a daughter instead of a son. Have not read this yet, But to be fair, I got this from my mom when I was about 10, and I was just like, I don't know. There was a lot of writing for me back then in terms of non-fiction, especially not concerning ancient Greece, you know? Didn't want to read that. Then I have a book I got recently for my birthday, and that is The American Museum, Slavery, Black History, and the Fight for Justice in Museums of the Southern States, or das amerikanische Museum, Sklaverei, schwarze Geschichte und der Kampf um Gerechtigkeit in Museen der Südstaaten. This is a German, it's an Austrian publication, so there's no translation into English as far as I know, also because it's quite a recent publication. I have not gotten around to this yet. I do definitely still want to read it in 2020 though. And this basically looks at museums and how museums deal with history. And it also kind of looks at how museums in America deal with Black history and the history of slavery, and compares that to how museums in Europe, in Germany and Austria deal with the Second World War, with the First World War, and with like our not so proud history, I would say. And I have not gotten around to it yet. I really want to. Again, I've talked about that before. I really want to work in museums, so this is definitely something that really interests me. Then next, of course, as an anthropology student, as a cultural studies student, as a like social studies student, I have to have something by Pierre Bourdieu, because like you can't get around to reading him, which I have not done yet. But this is just a collection of his more anthropological texts, or like texts that concern themselves more with anthropology rather than sociology. And Suhrkamp, like this publisher that like publishes books in this format, is actually quite well known, especially when it comes to non-fiction and academic stuff. So yeah, that's something that I still have to do, but I'm just really intimidated because Bourdieu does not write in a way that reads very easily. And this definitely, I would not even call this non-fiction. This is solidly like in the space of academic work, because non-fiction for me generally is still very like popular writing, you know? It's writing that has to be accessible because you want a lot of people to read it, whereas academic work is specifically geared towards people in that field, in that discipline. And so a lot of times it can be written quite difficultly. Then I have a book that I have half read already, and that is The Innocent Anthropologist by Nigel Barley. And this is just kind of his field diary from when he did his first field work, and it kind of gives a realistic look at what field work actually is like, including like diarrhea, feeling really alone because you don't understand what anyone is saying, and just struggling a lot because field work of course has been romanticized a lot over like the course of decades, if not centuries. And so yeah, this is a more realistic look, and it's quite fun to read, to be honest. I really enjoyed when I read it, but I read it over the summer and I couldn't finish it over the summer, and so when I started uni again I just stopped reading it, and I still need to finish this. And this book right here is just an encyclopedia about ethnology, where you have like different words that mean a lot within anthropology and what exactly they're supposed to mean. So yeah, that's that. So the very last thing I want to do is go through the books that I had to buy for uni. A lot of these books were specifically published for specific courses I took at uni, so they're kind of like scripts, but not really, because they're still written like books. They're still just written like introductions to certain aspects of anthropology. And the first of those is Anthropology of Myths by Elke Mada, who I think she's now actually retired, but she, like, I had her a lot. And of course this is about like mythos and how like myths exist within cultures and what their importance is to cultures. And important texts, like, it's just an introduction to the anthropology of myths. That's all it is. And next I have Introduction into the Ethnology of Oceania, and this is by Hermann Mückle, which I'm actually taking 2 courses with this semester. And this book is, again, exactly what the title says. It talks both about the history of the place, so the Southern Pacific Islands. It also talks about the history of colonization of these places. It talks about the history of the ethnology, or like the exploring these places. And then it also talks about the history of the myth of the Southern Pacific and the South Sea. And it's like, I really enjoyed this book, actually. I enjoyed it a lot. Then next I have Anthropology of Economics by Gertraud Seiser, which I actually have not read because I did buy this book, but then I didn't end up taking the exam for the course. So I didn't end up studying for the exam, so I didn't end up reading the book. But yeah, again, an introduction to the anthropology of economics is basically what this book is, and just talking about the basic theories within that field and so on. And then the last book, and I would highly recommend this if you ever want like a good introduction into what anthropology is and what ethnology is, I would highly recommend you read this one, and that is Small Places, Large Issues by Thomas Hyland Eriksson. And this is an introduction into social and cultural anthropology. And it talks both about the history of the field, notable anthropologists, as well as like introducing certain concepts that we have within like social and cultural anthropology, what we need to talk about and so on. And actually, to talk about a lot of my cultures in fantasy videos, I have gone back to this book again and kind of freshened up on some of the basic, you know, concepts of anthropology so that I don't say anything wrong. But yeah, I can definitely highly recommend this book. So yeah, that was it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I really hope you took something away from this, even if it was just like, don't be like me and actually read your nonfiction. And with that said, I hope I'll see you soon. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also subscribing. Tell me in the comments down below if you're interested in picking any of these nonfiction up, and if you enjoy reading nonfiction, because I do enjoy reading it. I just never do for some reason. And yeah, all the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. All the links to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, in which we read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman per month, are also in the description box down below. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!